to start by building out the room with a plane. So just Shift A, mesh plane, and then just scale this out. And I kind of want this to be sort of a long hallway I'm looking down into. Now, I kind of just want to create a sort of subtle like reading corner where someone might be hanging out on an afternoon reading a book next to their beautiful lamp that they designed. So before you go too far with any room design, it's a good idea to think about where your camera is actually going to be looking. So I'm going to add in a camera to my scene with Shift A and then camera. And then that will appear right there at the 3D cursor. But what I'm going to do is go into my camera view with 0 on the numpad, or again, there is an option right here to go into our camera view, and then Shift and tilde to use the W, A, S, and D keys to sort of fly back until I think I'm looking at about the distance that I want to be. So I'll leave my camera right about there, and then I'll change my rotation to 90 so it's looking straight ahead, and then just holding Control with these values to make sure that they're snapped to even increments. So with our camera about where we want it, I was also thinking that it might be cool to do this as a vertical scene. So I'm going to switch this from 1920 to 1080 by 1080 to 1920 so that we have just a little bit more of a current feel to this, creating a vertical render. And it will allow us some unique opportunities with the composition and kind of the story we're telling. So this is looking good. Now, one thing we haven't played with too much yet is the focal length. So on the camera, our focal length by default is usually set to 50, but we might consider bringing that up to something longer, like maybe you're looking longer down this hallway. And because I'm a simple person, I usually like to leave that at very simple increments, so I'll just set that to 100. So that looks pretty good. So we'll set that at, we'll just get our camera back to where it was right there. That's looking good. And then let's pull our lamp into the scene. So our lamp, I think we want to be sort of more against the wall, and I'll just rotate that over a little bit. And then our chair, let's pull that back too. Now our chair we have not done all the parenting with yet. So I'm going to, I could either parent them all to this cushion object, or another way to parent objects is with an empty. So I'm going to snap my cursor to the middle of our cushion right there where the origin is, add a empty, and that'll be a cube. And then I can right click and change the size of that empty. And an empty is basically just a null object that you can't see it when you render, but it's good for just kind of controlling things. That's sort of how I use it. So I'm going to select all our chair objects here until they're all selected. And then lastly, select the empty. Remember the lighter orange one is the active object, and press Control P to parent that to the object. Now, instead of having to select all those objects each time I want to move it, I can just select the empty object. So now I can place that in an area I want. Now, one thing we haven't covered yet, I want to just move this along the floor. So rather than having to go into top view and move it, because when you're in top view, it's not going to be moving in the Z axis because that's the axis we're looking down. It's only going to do X and Y. But you can press G and then Shift Z, which will exclude the Z axis. So G, Shift Z, and something like that, I think is going to look pretty good. I want it to be mostly in the center of the scene. Now in my camera view, I kind of want to see this right side wall a little bit. So I'm just going to move this over a little bit. And I'll use my gizmo to make sure I'm moving the right direction. Maybe that can come to something like that, just so that we see that wall. And then maybe our lamp, we don't want to see quite as much of it, so let's move that over. And then similarly, this lamp base is feeling a little tall, so we can press A and then S and Shift Z, just repeating that similar action to make that just a tad smaller. So that's looking good. Maybe we need to pull out just a little bit more, so let's come out like that till we have a nice frame shot. And then let's sort of extend this scene out a little bit more. So I'm going to press E to extrude this out. And then I actually want this to be a corner. So whoops, let's delete just that face. And then we can select these two and extrude them over. And then let's just go ahead and pull this out further. We're not actually going to see that, but that'll just help us get a little bit of context. So right away, I think what I want to do is start lighting this scene, and maybe not adding some materials quite yet, but I want to play a little bit with where these walls are landing and kind of what the shadows are going to look like. So I'm going to split my view, which you can click up here in the top right and drag over, or you can just anywhere we see those two arrows, you can right click and you can do a split. So I'm going to do a vertical split, move that over just until we have something like that. So decide which side you want your rendered view to be on. I typically like to have it on the right side here, but let's have this be our rendered view. And we'll render in cycles. So real quick, I'll go into the rendered view, make sure I'm rendering in cycles, And then I want to be rendering on my GPU, which is not enabled currently. So let's go into our system preferences and change that to optics or CUDA. There's different options. And then now we can see we have our rendered view here. We might want to set a render border with Control B, just so that we're not rendering what's outside the frame there. And we have our default very boring world, but I instead want to use the sky texture. So let's add that in. Let's bring the sun maybe up a tad and rotate it around just until we've got sort of a nice light coming into our scene. I kind of want it to be casting just right into our chair. Way too bright right now though, so let's bring the strength down quite a bit. And we need to start adding a lot more wall objects in here so that it's not quite so bright. So one thing I'll also do in my render view is always turn off the overlays so I just have a nice unobstructed view of what we're working on. And let's start shaping this out. So for the ceiling, well, let's actually start with some walls over here just so we don't have so much light coming in from the right. So I'm going to create a new object, and that will just be a plane object. And then let's press Tab RX90. I'm doing that rotation in edit mode so that our orientation over here stays 0, 0, 0. Always good, remember to have this be 1 and these be 0 if you can. So I'm going to add in a solidify modifier, and this will be sort of just our walls object. And you can already see we're starting to get some nice shadows there. So I'm going to bring that up till it's sitting just right on my plane. And then I might move this edge over. And then maybe this is kind of like a multiple window corridor. So let's select this whole object, duplicate this over. And we're getting a lot of light kind of coming in from behind our scene. So even if it's behind the camera, sometimes it's a good idea to actually extend your scene so that, you know, whatever light might be coming in from your world texture is not visible to the light coming in. So now it's a little bit darker in the foreground like you might expect. Maybe you're walking down a hallway and you've got sort of the light shining through these windows on the end. Now similarly, I'd like to add in a ceiling here. So let's just select our floor object. Maybe we'll just take this plane, and then I'm going to duplicate it with Shift D and move that up. And I'm actually going to want this to be its own object. So I'm going to press P again to separate, and separate that by selection. And let's move our origin. So right now the origin is sort of in the same place that it was on the floor object, but let's right click and set our origin to geometry. And that'll just place it where the center of the geometry for that object is. Okay, cool. So that's looking like a nicely framed shot. Now, one other fun thing I wanted to do in this scene was to add a picture on the wall. And there's a really easy way that we could do that, and that's by just importing an image of the picture you want to use, and then we can sort of build a frame around it. So I want to find where about I want to put that picture, and I think it's going to be sort of just in the middle of this wall here. So I'm going to select that wall, Shift S, cursor to selected, and then what I can do is add in an image. Now we actually need an add-on for this. So if you press Shift A, you will see that there's an image option. We have reference and background image, which is very useful to use sometimes, but I want to add an image and have it sort of automatically be in the scene with a texture on it. So there's an add-on that actually comes with Blender called the Import Images as Planes add-on. And if you search for that, it's installed by default. You don't have to download it or anything. Then you'll have a new option where you can do just that. So I'll press Shift A, add an image, and that'll be the images as planes. And then I'll just select an art piece that I've selected here. This is one that I totally painted on my own, didn't create with AI at all, but you might have some art you made on your own, but this is one that I generated using a popular AI image generation service. Really cool, especially for 3D scenes, to start getting some art on your walls. So that's looking good, something like that. Once your scene starts to get complicated, you kind of want to be moving around things really quickly. There's a really good hotkey for that, and it's period on your number pad will frame selected. Okay, so in this lesson, we added quite a few more details to our scene. We, of course, built out the wall. We added a little bit of lighting so that we could see what kind of shadows we were working with. We added a table, we added some shelves, and some other little floorboard details. And we even added a picture onto our wall using the import images as planes add-on to just start bringing a little bit more personality and life into our scene.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe to stay up to date on all of our latest videos.